Which quarterback in tonight's draft do you feel like has the most to prove?
Caleb Williams, and it's not even close. The Bears are one of the organizations that is starving for good quarterback play. Never had a 4,000-yard passer. Strictly to Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams was the #1 recruit coming out of high school at quarterback, okay? He goes to Oklahoma under Lincoln Riley, who had back-to-back, I believe, #1 draft picks at quarterback. And then he transfers when Lincoln goes to USC, transfers, and wins the Heisman. I mean, this young man has accomplished so much already. And, you know, I said last year, there's a lot of his game that is, if you took Josh Allen, if you took Lamar, and you took Patrick Mahomes and you put them together, there's a lot of traits and skills within his game that remind me of those guys. So the floor, like the standard of who Caleb has been, is unbelievable. The organization, starving. They make the trade last year to not draft early on a Bryce Young or a CJ Stroud. And then they make, and probably the right decision this year, to move on from Justin Fields. To remind everybody how they got Justin Fields, they gave up 2 first-round picks, a 4th-round pick, and a 5th-round pick to go up and get Justin Fields just 3 years ago. And then Justin Fields, in his 3-year career, under 2 head coaches in a bad situation, if we're keeping it real, accounted for 54 touchdowns and 30 interceptions and 9,000 yards of total offense. Okay. He wasn't terrible in a terrible situation. So, like, there's a lot of pressure for Caleb to go be what they've never had before in Chicago, and that's every time they step on the field, they got the better quarterback. They've never had that. And he's got to go be like a superstar for him to be what the expectation is.
Dan Orlovsky, I'm throwing out this name. You're going to look at me like I'm insane, like you've never looked at me before. I'm going to throw out the name J.J. McCarthy. That's what I'm going to throw out there. Now, listen, I know that you are absolutely right with Caleb Williams. Here's why I'm throwing out J.J. Because over the last week and a half or so, I'm hearing that this brother has the potential to be a top 5 pick. I'm like, what? Are you kidding me?
Right.
Nobody, I wasn't seeing that. I know he's a reigning national champion. He led Michigan to an undefeated season. We get all of that, and he deserves his props and respect for that. But when you look at him and the kind of things that they talk about him right now, he's an intermediate thrower, throwing in between the numbers in the middle of the field, that's his strength. Throwing outside the numbers, throwing the deep passes, not necessarily his strength, okay? When you think about him compared to Jaden Daniels and others, you didn't really look at him on that level. Drake May, you haven't looked at him on that level. When we talked about Penix or Bo Nix, we haven't talked about J.J. McCarthy on those levels. And then all of a sudden, in a week and a half, his name starts popping up. And you start hearing about the Giants potentially, or even the Chargers, even though the Chargers need a tackle and they need receiving, they need a few other things. But, of course, Jim Harbaugh, the former coach at Michigan, now the head coach with the Los Angeles Chargers, wants to infuse his vision for the team. I know that Caleb Williams is the #1 overall pick's got a lot to prove, particularly with what you said about Jaden Daniels out of LSU, because you actually said at one point you would take him with the #1 overall pick. You said that weeks ago, right? So obviously, if you Caleb Williams and you got people like Dan Orlovsky that are saying, excuse me, Daniels out of LSU, that's something that you have to pay attention to. And you're the #1 overall pick. You consider the history of the Chicago Bears, the most renowned quarterback they've had in recent memory wasn't recent memory. It was Jim McMahon in 1985. Clearly, there's an infusion of something that they need from the quarterback spot, because it can't be the days of Jay Cutler. It can't even be the days of Justin Fields. It's got to be on an elevated level. I get that. I understand it. He's the #1 overall pick, supposedly, presumably. We get it. But when you're talking about a guy that nobody was looking at in a certain way, and then all of a sudden, the last couple of weeks for the draft, you're talking about this guy potentially being a top 5 pick. If J.J. McCarthy ends up getting taken in the first 5 or 6 picks of this NFL draft, which I doubt will happen, by the way. But if that happens, I'm going to tell you, that's a brother that's going to have something to prove, because we look at the talent of Caleb Williams, and we don't have any question marks about him. Nobody is going to blame the Chicago Bears for taking him. But if you use a top 5, top 6 pick on J.J. McCarthy, everybody's going to be looking at your organization like, what the hell were you thinking? Is this the second coming of Mitchell Trubisky, even though he's not Drake May out of North Carolina? They're going to have questions about that. And that's the only reason I brought his name up, D.O.
All right, I don't disagree with you. This young man, J.J. McCarthy, has done stuff that is I mean, he's won basically everywhere. Here's a couple things that we had the conversation about J.J. McCarthy with. Stephen A., he was the number 5 ranked quarterback coming out of high school. This is why I have said this, and it's an admiration way, and I say it partly jokingly. This is Patrick Mahomes' fault. Okay, everybody is trying to go find and chase Patrick Mahomes. Oh, let's go get the guy that does stuff that we can't explain, and let's go get the guy that he's so raw, but he's so talented.
I don't agree with that.
And, we'll fix Stephen A., that's why we would draft these physical talents.
But let me interject for a second. Here's why I disagree with you in terms of your classification of the Patrick Mahomes that people are looking for. I don't think, of course, you would love to have a Patrick Mahomes talent. I think when you talk about people looking for the Patrick Mahomes, it was the Patrick Mahomes that was taken 10th. It wasn't. That's what I'm saying. They're looking at it, excuse me, we had a Mitchell Trubisky that was picked ahead of him. They were talking about Deshaun Watson coming out of Clemson and others. And here we find this gem in Patrick Mahomes, and we didn't even have to use one of the first 9 picks or so to get him. Okay? I think that's what people are looking for when they're looking at Patrick Mahomes. The guy with that level of talent that a lot of people may not see and might pass up on so he could end up falling in our lap. I think that's what people are looking for. Everybody wants the talent that is Patrick Mahomes. But the point is, who's going to see it that early like Kansas City did?
Who do you think could be some hidden gems of tonight's first round?
Yeah, I'm going to Georgia for 2 different guys. Number 1, Ladd McConkey. I think Ladd McConkey, and this is such a deep wide receiver class, but I think he's got a lot of nuance to his game that is going to be really good if he goes to the right place in the NFL. Could I see him being a pick for the Los Angeles Rams and a Cooper Kupp type of player? Absolutely. And then Brock Bowers. I'm just telling everybody, if I was Chicago at 9, I would think long and hard about taking Brock Bowers.
Oh.
If they don't, and I'm in the Indianapolis Colts and Shane Steichen, he is perfect for Shane Steichen in Indianapolis Colts and Anthony Richardson. What do you got, Stephen A.?
What is your definition of a hidden gem? Who doesn't know that Brock Bowers is the best tight end in the draft? That's not hidden. Everybody knows him. That's not a hidden gem. We know that Brock Bowers.
But I'm giving you where I would take him. That's a little bit hidden. If I was the Bears, and if you told me Rome Odunze might be there at 9 or Brock Bowers is there at 9, I think I would take Brock Bowers, even though I think Rome Odunze is fantastic. And Ladd McConkey, I think, is going to be a first-round wide receiver that immediately steps into the NFL. And we're talking, I think a guy that can go for 60 or 70 catches.
Quick question. What do you think a quarterback needs more, a wide receiver or a tight end in today's NFL?
Tight end.
Tight end. Okay. That's right. That's what I want to know, because that makes total sense. That makes total sense. Because I'm looking at Chicago right now with DJ Moore, Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen, I mean, listen, they both can ball, no doubt about that, but in the same breath, durability is an issue. It's a question mark. I want the most durable individual so Caleb Williams can have somebody to rely upon. That's how I'm looking at it. But if you talk about tight end, I clearly think that a tight end is more important, because obviously that's a safety net for you, because the tight end usually ain't going deep outside the numbers. So I would look at it from that perspective, and I'd say tight end as well.
Yeah, and just real quick, Stephen, I think if we look at some of the young quarterbacks that have had to play right away in the NFL and had success, I go back to 2016 and Dak Prescott. Obviously dominant offensive line, but he had Jason Witten. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes had Travis Kelce. I think when you take a really good, young, talented tight end and you give him to that young quarterback, the different stuff that you can do to gather information and create matchups makes the intellectual, the thinking element of quarterback play easier for that young guy.
Got it.